I am excited that you are okay. I'll hold on. I'm going to save this because this is going to be good.
Okay, let's go.
Welcome to another episode of Review Improve. I'm your host, Sam Rust, and with me, as always, is my trusty co-host, aka the Lumberjack, Mr. Bradley Luce. Brad, you in flannels today? What's going on?
Wow, I'm actually getting nicknames. I don't really know what to do. I mean, I have this image I have to live up to now. You didn't give me a warning. Actually, it's going pretty good. I've removed the last tree, so I have no more trees. So the lumberjack should be leaving. I shipped him out of town. Well, actually, no, the trees are still in my yard. I just have to get rid of the lumber. So lumberjack's being shipped out with those. So I got to figure out what personnel I'm going to be next.
Yeah, well, it's always good to be thinking on your next alter ego. So congratulations on successfully navigating the lumberjack phase
Oh,
of
thank you.
your
Yeah.
existence. I am excited for today's show, and I think I say this on most shows, but I'm especially excited today because we're doing a couple of things a little bit differently. One, we're reviewing a biography, not an autobiography. We've done those. We've done a lot of self-help books. We've done several genres, but we're doing a biography today of George Patton, General George Patton. We also, I convinced Brad to do this without taking copious notes. And so I'm excited to freewheeling Brad here today.
Oh, gosh. Yeah, I think we were talking last time because cause I shared my screen with you as we were looking at some stuff, and you were like, "Holy cow, you write out like your entire thought." So I was like, "Yeah, that's the way I do things." Yeah. So
If you've listened to our podcast for any length of time, you've probably picked up that one of the reasons that Brad and I are good friends is that we balance each other.
we try to.
we try to, at least. But I have appreciated the effort that Brad puts into the podcast on multiple fronts. But I am excited to push him out of his comfort zone a little bit and join the dark side. Before we get into today's book, though, in our last episode reviewing a book, we covered The Miracle Morning by Hal Elrod, and we talked about morning routines specifically and how Brad and I were going to help hold each other accountable. And I wanted to take a little bit of time at the top of the show to talk about how it's going, and what are some of the things that we've implemented since we reviewed that book maybe 3 weeks ago now. I'm going to start off by saying I have not been as successful as I would have liked. I think I was working out the percentages, and I've had the morning that I intended 80% of the time. Now, my goal was 100% of the time, but I am happy in the sense that having the morning that I want 80% of the time is probably, 30 to 40% better than what I was doing before reading the book and before kind of co-signing on to this accountability challenge. So, just from a really high level, that's where I'm at. Where are you at, Brad, with in terms of success rate?
Well, that's good. That's actually better than me. I think so. There's several factors to go into before I say how well I'm doing. Before that, go into it. No excuse, because I mean, technically, I should be perfect.
but I sense that there are going to be some excuses coming. Am I wrong?
It depends on what you label as an excuse. So yes, I am about, I would say, 70 to 73%.
Ooh, man, specificity. I like it.
Yeah. So I found difficulty when not normal things came into my life. So we had family staying with us for over a week. So I found that kind of put a hiccup because it was small house, got to kind of work my schedule around that. Also not having a set job. And so one thing that I'll share with everyone, so Sam, I asked you, I was like, hey, can you call me at 5:45 a.m. my time, 6:45 a.m. your time? And that added so much motivation. I mean, like, I was literally like, so my alarm goes off at 5:40, and I was like, I got to be out there setting up my books when he calls me. Because I mean, that's for people who don't have that, oh, I have to be to my job at 6 a.m., 7 a.m., and you're trying to get yourself, like, I did great going out of the box, but then as time went on, I was like, you know what, I could fudge this day, kind of I could get up at 6:15. I could get up at 6:30, and still get my morning done. It'll just be a little later. It'll be okay. But then I just realized, okay, if I get up at a certain time every single day, I'll get more done, feel better, etc. Kind of what we talked about in the episode. So just having you, Sam, as like that external influence to motivate myself helps a lot. So
I would completely agree. Brad and I have been texting each other how we've been doing on our morning routines pretty faithfully, not every single day, but most days. And that has been helpful for me. Another area that I've entertained, and I haven't even run by you yet, Brad, so surprise. I was thinking of adding a calendar where we could see how our mornings have gone, what we're shooting for, and how those mornings went, and possibly even include our listeners in that as well. That'd be a whole another level of accountability. So we'll mull that over and keep working on it. But I will say, for me, I am not as regimented as you are generally, and that's something that I want to work on. I also, at this stage in my life, I am not sure that I can commit to getting up at a specific time every single morning, because I do tend to have engagements that will keep me out till at least midnight, whether that's work or church meetings that I have to attend or various things. And so I will adjust my time of arising depending on when I went to bed. But I'm trying to make sure that even if it's a day where I don't have a ton of time, that I'm fitting in all 5 or all 6 of the savers to kickstart my day. And I've found, even there was one day where I intentionally gave myself 10 minutes to get through all 6 things, which isn't a whole lot of time to execute. But even still, got up, did my 10 minutes, still had a much more productive day overall as a result of starting it in an intentional manner. And I think that's, again, not to beat a dead horse, but that's really the point of that book, is have a morning routine, be productive, kickstart your day well. If you start it with a success, chances are that's going to roll into the rest of your day.
Yeah. I have to say, I've been working out when I do my mornings, and I actually hurt my leg this morning, so that's all on you, Sam, for pushing me so hard.
Well, I'm excited to read our next book then, but I won't spoil that. We'll get into the episode. Before we transition, any updates on the job front that you'd want to share with me or with the listening audience, Brad?
Okay, so for the past 2 weeks, I've averaged at least 1 interview a day. It's actually, so I've slowed down in my job applications. I'm up to like 274, I think, last time I checked. So it's pretty high up there, and they're starting to consistently come in and call me on the phone, emailing me. So I'm consistently interviewing. I just have not had any offers yet, which is really bugging me. But I'm pretty far along the process on AutoZone, Cintas, Oldcastle, and Abbott Laboratories. So 4 main companies, which I'm just waiting. Like, all right, guys, any day now would be great. So
that's a very diverse set of potential employers.
I'm wondering if that's a bad thing, because they're all asking me like, okay, so you've gone from granite and marble to electric vehicles. What makes you want to start like being a production supervisor for washing uniforms? Like, or what makes you want to go into like the brick making process? Or what makes you want to make heart pumps? Like, hey, it's growing, reviewing my life, growing and learning.
Yeah. Well, and that would be tough as an interviewer. Like, you want somebody to be passionate about the job that they're coming in for, but at the same time, it's kind of tough to expect that somebody's going to walk into to your facility and just have this existential crisis in their life that can only be solved if they're working on a heart pump assembly line. Like, it's probably not going to happen.
Yeah.
But generally, some enthusiasm for the position is warranted.
I try to. Well, I do research, and I come in with like, hey, I read this article about you guys. Your stock's at this price. I go in with info, so I don't just leave them hanging.
Hit them with both barrels right as you walk through the door.
Yep.
Nice. Give him that trademark Brad Luce smile. Love it.
I try.
Very good. Well, thanks for the update, Brad. Look forward to hearing a successful outcome here in the near future at getting at least an interview a day. That's quite an accomplishment. And man, almost 300 jobs applied to. Way to go. That's a testament to your faithfulness and to your willingness to continue to push the resume out there in a lot of different forms. With that, let's jump into today's book. We are
Let's do it.
covering, it's a biography of George Patton. It's called Patton, the Man Behind the Legend, written by Martin Blumenson. This book is a little bit of an older book. Blumenson was Patton's official biographer, and was written in the 80s, I do believe. And so, generally Blumenson had access to all of Patton's papers, his diaries, his correspondence. There's been quite a few biographies written about Patton. He's obviously a very colorful character. I wanted to start by just giving a brief biographical sketch, and then and a brief why. Why are we doing this book? And maybe we should start there. This is definitely a little bit different. This book was my idea, not to take credit for it. Just if this goes down in flames.
Let me jump in here. Right, we did it because he's the 10x in person, and you are trying to be the 10x in person, and so you're trying to find these people that are 10x in person before you, so you can copy their what they do. That's pretty much why we did it.
Yes.
Admit
Yep.
it. Okay, there we
go. Yeah. Brad is my counselor. He knows me better than I know myself. What did we say at the beginning of the episode, that we balance each other?
Yes.
So Brad knows why we did this. I did it because I was interested in Patton and subconsciously for a lot of the reasons that Brad just mentioned. But we also wanted to be diverse in the type of books and articles and various other resources that we're covering for you, our listeners. We want to make sure that we're staying fresh, and that we're challenging ourselves, and we're challenging you, our listeners. So there are several reasons behind that. I think you're going to notice that as we move through the next couple of months, that we're going to have a pretty diverse list of books that we're going through. I'm looking forward to every book on our list. But Brad and I had a brainstorming session maybe a month or 6 weeks ago, really working at diversity within the books that we're covering. And so that today leads us to Patton. And then a brief bio, and then we'll jump into the meat. George Patton was born in 1885 in California. Grew up there, went to West Point. Actually was part of the pseudo wars against Pancho Villa down on the southern border. It was really interesting reading about that stage of his life, particularly with all the news circulating around that part of our country right now. And then obviously went into World War I. Was the very first American officer assigned to a tank battalion, was in charge of kind of promulgating tank warfare theory. Had a long interlude between World War I and World War II, and then is most well known for his exploits in World War II. Led the Operation Torch. That was a diversionary landing on the west coast of Africa. Led the invasion of Sicily, and then completed the breakout in Operation Overlord, and the Western European campaign from summer of 1944 to the end of the war. He died in 1945, shortly after the conclusion of the war, in a car accident, actually. So that's kind of a brief sketch of his life. Brad, I'm curious, we've withheld speaking about the book, really, and our thoughts. Overall, this is a little bit different. What were your thoughts on Patton as a man, Patton going into this book, and just, in broad stretch, how have they changed since you've read the book?
So I saw Patton coming into this book as, I would say, as mid-1900s presidential material. That's how I saw him, like someone who was kind of stately, good with his words. I mean, he's amazing with verbiage and the way he writes things. But I thought I saw him as more of like what do you think of as a World War II general? Kind of like Eisenhower, diplomatic, going in, very knowledgeable. But as I read the book, my view of him went up in some areas and down in others. So he was very biased and posh. So he looked down on a lot of people, and it really started coming out there at the end of World War II, especially when he was supposed to be helping the Jews, displaced persons, and he really started like talking down about the Jews and or talking pro-Nazi in some areas. So, I mean, not to talk bad about him, but I don't know, I just didn't really like the way he wasn't respectful towards all men. And I know I might get something like make inner. This is what happens when we don't have notes. um, the, I know that I might be like pushing some people's buttons, but honestly, I think as Americans, especially in our Christian backgrounds that we claim our country is from, I think we should be friendly towards all people, and I think we should hold in high regard every human life. And
Yeah, I mean,
I really didn't like the way he came out towards the end of his life, and he just had no filter. So I mean, that really drove my view of him as a person down. But then as him as a leader, wow, he was everywhere. He really knew how to like motivate his men. He really knew how to organize. At one point during World War II, the Germans were coming down and attacking the line. So he swung his entire Third Army. He swung them 90 degrees with no one getting lost, overtrained. They had never been on before, no maps or anything really, no real research on. He just swung the whole army around to meet them and saved most of the Allied army because of that. And so just that alone, that's his leadership, his organization, his knowledge of warfare is amazing.
yeah, I would agree. I think I had maybe a little bit of a fuller picture of Patton. I love history. I know you do too, Brad. I have read a ton of books on World War II and was generally not surprised by a lot of the things that maybe were expanded upon in the biography, both for better and for worse. But just like you mentioned at the beginning, a very colorful character, a very interesting man, a very driven man.
Mm-hmm.
Definitely had his failings, and those come through pretty clearly in the book. I think the biographer was kind in some respects to material that he included, and probably could have said much more on those. But I feel that that Blumenson did a good job of generally presenting Patton pretty much as the historical record sees him. And really, you're not trying to influence his reader, not trying to make him this amazing, almost godlike figure or presidential-like figure, but also not running him down for failings that were fairly common to his time and even to the American army or just general people in general of that time. So not to excuse some of his failings, but I appreciated that I felt like he was treated fairly in the book and examined both for better and for worse.
That he did. The author was very non-biased. He was very like, here are the facts. You can decide on your own. But like some of it though from Patton, he was wanting to live up to the standards he saw. Like in the beginning of the book, it talked through the quote unquote ghosts that Patton always had or felt was over him, because he came from a long background of military and high-ranking civilians, from his family, and so he always felt like he had to live up to the standards his grandfather and great grandfather and his family before him had set in wars and in leadership, and so he was always trying to stand up to that standard and meet that standard. So that's one of the reasons why he was always pushing himself, and that was also probably stemmed from, or his view on other people probably stemmed from that as well, was he's like, I have this high standard to meet and you're not part of this, so I'm going to probably look down on you. I kind of could see that. I thought it was very interesting how his father would read to him at like age 10 and under. His father would be reading to him of the Scottish Highland Wars, Shakespeare, Homer, the Bible. He'd be reading these deep. Of course, the Bible, of course, I read to my son, 2 years old. But I mean, the other thing, I don't read like Shakespeare to my 2-year-old son. But his father would. I mean, as under age 10, just so he had this really good foundation of words and what they meant and what words could do to inspire people. So he had a great foundation of literacy and history.
Yeah. And you touched on it several times during that monologue, Broad, but one of the things that stands out throughout the book is Patton's drive. And I wanted to spend a little bit of time talking about that because
connect.
it's evident even from a really early age.
Oh
Uh,
yeah. Hmm.
Patton, people believe, had a fairly severe form of dyslexia, actually.
Hmm.
Had a pretty severe learning disability. I don't think he could read until he was 10.
I think it
Uh,
was actually a little older than that, maybe like 12
Maybe
or
even a little
13.
bit older. Yeah. So definitely pretty delayed, was homeschooled until he could get to a point where he could read, and then sent away to a boarding school, actually. Um, but in spite of that, he spent his entire life working to overcome that, you know, disability, that handicap, but he never let it slow him down. He didn't let much in life slow him down of any consequence. Now, there's other issues with that. Um, as you were reading the book, Brad, where did you see that drive coming from?
I think two main places. Number one, his family trying to live up that standard, kind of like I said before. And number two, uh, trying to prove to himself, probably from the dyslexia and his slow learning as a child, to prove to himself that he could do what most people probably thought he couldn't, and probably just proving to people that he could do anything he wanted. But then again, he was never satisfied. He wanted perfection. He was a perfectionist to like the every cross T and dotted I. Um,
Except when it came to spelling.
yeah, he was a horrible speller.
I think an interesting note in that is that his parents did not drive him to greatness. Now, they definitely passed down, tales of their family history and, their ancestors fighting in the Revolutionary War, the Civil War, or even before that, back to the Scottish Wars. They were very proud of their heritage. But his father uh, was a very kind, loving, paternal figure in his life. Like
Mhm.
his dad sounds like actually an amazing father,
Yeah.
and didn't have unreasonable expectations of his son, didn't raise him, expecting greatness, I guess, but wanted to help push him towards it, primarily because I believe Patton wanted that himself. Patton, an interesting dichotomy, a very flamboyant personality, but you also see throughout his life that he's fairly insecure.
Hmm.
And so he's always being torn within himself. And I think that drive, and where I was, taking this conversation, is that drive was really from within. It wasn't something that somebody else set the bar and then he's trying to achieve it. He set his own bar at a pretty early age. Wanted to be in the military, wanted to go to West Point, wanted to achieve fame and glory, and military might, so to speak. But it wasn't necessarily an idea or a standard that was put upon him by someone, whether his father or someone else. Now, definitely his family moved a lot of people and used all their connections to try to get him into West Point and to help him through his career.
Yeah.
But it seemed like Patton was always at the helm of his ship, so to speak. He was always the one pushing the throttle, and I think a lot of that comes back to his own inner conflict with, as you mentioned, a somewhat illustrious history. He kind of viewed himself as descended from the gentry, as it were, those who were endowed with uh, warlike spirit and noble blood, so to speak, to bring aristocracy into the 19th and 20th centuries. And he constantly was questioning himself and whether he had the ability, the wherewithal. He constantly is questioning, am I a coward? Am I a true man? And so I think ultimately he was trying to become the best man that he could, and he saw the military as the way, not necessarily to prove it to other people as much as to prove to himself that he was the best embodiment of a man possible.
Yeah, I guess so. Like at one point in West Point, he was manning the targets downrange during target practice, and he wanted to prove to himself that he could stand up under fire. So when you're manning the targets, you're not supposed to stand up until they're done firing. All the guns are down. Then you set up new targets, and then you duck back down. They shoot. Well, while they're still shooting, he just stands up for like, I don't know how, like 15 seconds, whatever. Lets several bullets go by him. He could have died, and then he sits back down. He's like, all right, I'm brave enough. And one story I thought was hilarious was he was leading later on after he graduated from West Point. He was leading his men in some drills, and his horse like bucked him, and kind of he's having trouble with his horse. And so at one point his horse was bucking and the horse fell down. And so he literally just stood over the horse, got his leg out from underneath of it, over the horse. So as the horse stood up, he was just sitting in the saddle already. He just stands up. He's like, all right, let's keep on going. I thought that was pretty cool. It's like, yeah, I would have just like walked it off and like, all right, let's get back on this thing. He's like, nope, I'm not even budging. So.
And part of that, as you hear that story, as you read that story, I'm playing the scene out in my mind. I'm like, he's trying to exercise dominion over this horse.
Mm-hmm.
Really wasn't about the horse. He was constantly concerned about how he was being perceived by others. And he knew that he had to achieve a legendary status among his men to effectively lead them into battle. And so he was constantly seeking out opportunities to prove his manhood, in a sense, to his men in a way that they really responded to. There was issues surrounding his treatment of walking wounded men, people who've gone through combat fatigue later in World War II. But one of the constant refrains throughout the book and through other books that I've read of World War II history is that he was probably the most beloved commander, at least in the Western theater, by his troops. They would move heaven and earth to follow him. He was constantly being put into situations where he had to whip, whether it was a battalion, a brigade, a division, or an army corps into shape. He would do so in pretty amazing, a short amount of time. And his men would just have this blind loyalty to him that was really quite something to read about, again, from this book by Blumenson and others. Just this idea that he was careful to cultivate an image, and in the process he became that image in a lot of ways. It wasn't inauthentic or disingenuous. He recognized what was needed to be a great military leader, and he strove to beat his own body, his own personality into the image that he felt would most bring success to the army.
And you can see that through his life as he was trying to shape that and do that. He actually had so many accidents throughout everything he was doing. He played polo like crazy until the point, I can't remember whether the doctor said, hey, you got to stop playing, you're going to die next accident, or he just decided, oh, no. So he said, I'm going to stop playing polo so that I don't get injured and be put out of the army. But one of his quotes is, he's like, an imperfect decision executed at once is worth more than an imperfect solution executed later. Success in war depends on speed, simplicity, and boldness. The fog of war covers the enemy as well. I really like that was him. He was like, hey, I don't care if it's not the perfect decision. Let's do it now. We got to do it. If we can act first and be simple about it so it's not so confusing that everyone gets confused and bogged down and starts shooting each other, let's do it. He's like, we can figure it out later. And I can see that now as people take just that whole mindset into business. As you see these startups and people, they've really taken, I mean, like I said before, he's kind of the embodiment of 10X to begin with. Just do it. Like, just action, and we'll figure it out as we go. We know the foundation. Let's just start moving, and we'll figure it out. And that's one of the things he was really upset, because he probably could have pushed all the way up to Berlin, given the chance. He probably could have ended the war at least a year early if they had just said, all right, go with it. Of course, I know Eisenhower had his reasons for not allowing him to do that. He's probably trying to be more diplomatic about it, save more lives, because I'm sure Patton would not have really had much respect for the collateral damage, he just would have gone for it. But yeah, any thoughts?
Yeah, I agree. He definitely was forceful and saw opportunities and wanted to seize them. But he balanced that, and I thought that you would appreciate this part of his personality, Brad, but he balanced that with recognizing being a great military leader isn't just about cultivating a cult of personality. It's not about being the guy with the most charisma. You actually have to know military history, you have
Mm,
to know strategy, you have to know logistics. There's a lot more to being a general than just shouting charge, fixing your bayonet, and running at the front of your men. That's the
yeah.
way wars were fought 300 years ago. That's just not the way they're fought now, or not even the way they were fought at the turn of the 20th century. And he recognized that, and so he spent inordinate amount of time, both at West Point and afterwards, training himself, absorbing knowledge from other people, studying, writing papers, always seeking to improve his own skill set so that when the moments arose when he could be in command of, whether it was a company or a complete army group, that he would have the skill set to turn 3 divisions in 2 days in the middle of winter in France. And send him 50 miles to the north at the Battle of the Bulge, so that he would be able to seize moments of opportunity, like at Palermo when he was taking over Sicily. He knew what he wanted. He wanted to be a great military leader, and he set about basically sharpening his skills in every single area that would be required to be an excellent military leader. And that, I think, is probably it's the biggest reason that he was a military success, is because he honed every area of his life around that. Now, he obviously wasn't perfect, and there's issues with his personality and some of how that played out. But generally, his skill set was unmatched by his peers. And I found it interesting that after the war, the Allies were interviewing all of the German generals, the high command, and they all their highest regard was reserved for Patton. They
Mm-hmm.
actually were pretty
Yep.
contemptuous towards a lot of the other generals, particularly thinking of Field Marshal Montgomery from the Brits. But Patton, they talked about almost in reverential tones. He was your best, von Rundstedt was quoted as saying at the end of the war. I think that's a testament to who he was and his skill as a leader, that the other side feared him above everybody else.
I think one of the things was he was, I think, the oldest general in the war. Everyone else were younger officers that really didn't have any combat experience. He had seen World War One. He had seen the development of the tanks. He had seen the development of technology into warfare. And so, one thing he didn't like about Eisenhower and Bradley and the other generals was he called them the they were staff officers, so they really didn't have much boots on the ground experience. But he had both. He had been a staff officer. He, like you said, he had done everything, but he had pulled strings and put himself into these spots where he could learn it. Just using connections, people he knew, letters, just barraging people with hundreds of letters, like literally like kissing up to him, like you are the one reason why I got this
I
position or
got a
something like
huge
that.
kick out of that. He was promoted to lieutenant general, and he responded by sending out a barrage of, I think it was over 200 letters to various officers, and a lot of those letters have survived to this day. And in every single one that we have, he credits that officer alone for
Yeah.
advancing him to this point in his career, whether it was through influence on his behalf or teaching him something or imparting wisdom somehow. He definitely was not above some brown nosing and some flattery, some out and out flattery, as it were.
Yeah. But it was also very interesting how he made war his life. It honestly, like, as he saw World War II like being wrapped up and everything, he was like, he saw the kind of the Russian Cold War era stuff starting. He's like, hey, let's just attack the Russians right now. He's like, let's go for it. That's how much he put war into his system. And it kind of makes sense. He devoted the first 65 years of his life to war. Then he was like, wow, what am I going to do with my life now? There's no war. I can't help rebuild this economic society. I can't help teach people how to run businesses. He's like, that's just not me. And so it was interesting. He didn't have any backup plan. I mean, that just kind of hit me. He's like, wow, if with me, I got to make sure I have other things. I can't devote my entire life to one thing, or I'm really going to be messed up when it goes down the road. I won't have any balance.
Yeah, I think in a lot of ways he achieved exactly what he set out to achieve from an early age. You know, the pinnacle of his career really was his victory tour that he took over the summer of 1945. But even then, you know, success was fleeting. It was not. You can just see that he summited. He was at the pinnacle of his military career. He had high honors from almost every single country in Europe. You know, anywhere he went in the United States, he was greeted with adoring crowds. And yet, this wasn't stated explicitly in the book, but just reading between the lines and seeing some of his quotes during that time period, you can just see there's this sense of emptiness and a longing to go back to Europe and to at least, you know, be back with his army, be back in a military form of life, and wishing for the next war. And man, I think when we make success, you know, in any one thing, any one external thing, our primary single all-consuming motivator, if we are blessed enough to achieve that one thing, we will arrive at that mountaintop and we'll be by ourselves. And there won't be the meaning or the fame. It won't count for much, even for yourself. So I think that was a cautionary tale in his success, that he still had that emptiness.
I with what you're saying, like reaching that plateau and being by yourself, his wife was so devoted to him. I was surprised. Like most of the time, I think as you read through history, if someone is that way, you don't usually see their spouses hanging around. I know it was a little bit different back in the mid 1900s. Around that era, you didn't see too many divorces and stuff, but it was interesting how, like, he would write to her like she was his foundation. He would write to her like, I have hay fever, I'm so nervous, I can't breathe, and then she'd write back a few words and he'd be good at least for a day until he got the next letter from her. I thought that was very interesting.
It was an interesting relationship. I'd love to read their letters, honestly. That was probably I came away from this book wanting to read more of was the letters between the two of them. He had a very active correspondence with her throughout his life, particularly when they were separated for years at a time during World War II. And she was definitely his rock. In fact, Blumenson writes that in his opinion, he would never have risen anywhere near as high as he did without the strength of Bea in his life, and their marriage, which definitely had its rocky times. It wasn't a picture of perfection, but she's very devoted to him. And I think that speaks in many ways to the power of marriage. If you really have someone that's devoted to you, and you love and are devoted to them, man, two can accomplish so much more than one. And that was definitely the case in their relationship.
Yeah, and some of the examples, he's like that one time when they went to a party, his wife went to a party, and then he came in with his dress uniform on. Some guy made some smart remark about wannabe officers or something, and she beat him up. He had to pull her off of him. Patton had to pull his wife off of him. We're like, yeah, that's pretty good devotion right there. I think that probably helped show him, it's like, hey, I have someone I can go to. I have someone who's got my back and I can tell anything about too and stuff. But yeah, it was interesting too how what they called Eisenhower in the letters. What they call him? It was something destiny or
divine destiny.
Divine destiny.
Divine destiny.
Because Dwight D. Eisenhower.
Yeah.
Yeah. But because all their correspondence were being read by people, just make sure no secrets are getting out. So they had to rename him. And yeah. Also thought it was interesting how he had his pipe almost everywhere he went. On the battlefield, he'd be strutting up and down the battlefield with his pipe, chewing on his pipe.
His pipe and his pearl-handled revolvers.
Yep.
That was Patton for you. All about
Yep.
flair, all about image, but not in a politician sort of way. And that was something that I appreciated. Was he definitely was conscious of his image, but he was very careful to back up the image he wanted to project by living in that manner.
Yeah.
One of the quotes that I really enjoyed that touch on this aspect is, hold on, never, you're going to have to edit this for me.
Yep. I'll speak so the camera records me while you're looking up. So viewers, you get to look at me for a few minutes. Hopefully it's not a few minutes, actually. Hopefully it's just like a couple seconds as Sam gets his notes into place. See, Sam, this is what happens when we don't have notes. Yeah, I mean, let's see, what else do I have? He loved, like he said before, he would read at each night. He started when he was about age 11 to 12 when he started in school. He was reading Scipio and Hannibal and in North Africa, and then Caesar, Napoleon, Joan of Arc, Stonewall Jackson, all of these. He created this army of knowledge around him, so then he could put that army to work to win the actual battles he was fighting.
Yeah. The quote that I wanted to reference, always do everything you ask of those you command. You know, he always cared for his men. He was asking during the winter months in 1944 to 1945 for extra blankets, fresh socks to avoid trench foot, extra boots. He cared for his men in very personal ways, not just out of pragmatic reasons, but because he genuinely cared about his men. You know, he's known for, you know, his quotes like the one you cited earlier about violent execution now is better than a perfect plan next week. But you know, he also talks about a pint of sweat saves a gallon of blood.
Yeah, I like that. I did like that.
You know, so he wasn't just completely foolhardy, rush into danger, action, action, action. He also recognized that war takes effort and that you can save lives with effort.
Yeah, I thought it was very interesting because he, kind of along those lines, he was respectful of a worthy opponent. Excuse me. And so he, like someone who could outthink him, outfight him, outmaneuver him. And because he would put a lot of thought into what went into things, so he could do the best at what he was doing. And so along those lines, he respected the German army because they were good fighters. And he, with that knowledge of books of reading, he would read about where the Romans would take people they dominated and make soldiers out of them, and once enemies would be fighting together as comrades. And he dreamed of that as like, hey, against the Russians, let's take the German army and let's band up with them and continue going.
Yep. Well, as we're coming to the conclusion here, Brad, before we get to our application, I don't know if you have a favorite Patton quote, but I wanted to share one of mine. I feel like this encapsulates Patton about as perfectly as 15 words could. It's not necessarily the one that I want to live by, but if you wanted to know what is Patton like, this is General George Patton. And there's going to be some mild profanity in here, so just heads up. It says, quote,
hold on.
Do your damnedest in an ostentatious manner all the time.
Okay, redo that without that word, like replace that word, okay, because on iTunes we'll get flagged.
Oh, we will?
Yeah, I have it as family friendly.
Oh, okay.
So
I'll do it over again.
yeah.
So this is one of my favorite Patton quotes. And I wanted to share this as we're wrapping up the episode, and we're going to censor it a little bit for our listeners. But the quote is, "Do your darndest in an ostentatious manner all the time." There's
There you go.
Patton for you.
I like it. Yeah, honestly, I didn't really pick out a quote that I like. I mean, honestly, I loved reading through his uh little snippets here and there, but yeah, I I'd say anyone who can go start reading some of the stuff he wrote, and it's beneficial.
So moving towards the end of our episode, Brad, overall, would you recommend this book? Did you enjoy the book? What's your recommendation here?
Yeah, I really enjoyed it. I would recommend it. I know not everyone out there really wants to sit down and read mainly military biography, so it's probably not for everyone out there. And some, even with some of the language, probably not some people probably wouldn't enjoy that either. But I recommend it because you really get a good picture of his life, learn a lot about him, and you get some good ideas on how to apply to business in your own life. Uh, and we can get into that in application, but yeah, I really liked it.
I thoroughly enjoyed it as well. I am a sucker for good military history, particularly World War II, one of my favorites. But like you, I just found there was so much that I could apply to my own life. Uh, Patton, as you've said several times in this episode, really embodies 10X. He
Mhm.
set a goal, and then he just set to work and knew what it would take to achieve the end goal, and worked tirelessly throughout his life to get there. He worked a step-by-step plan, and it worked. He achieved the pinnacle of his profession. A fascinating character, a fascinating study of humanity, really, in Patton. There's so much good, there's so much bad, and you put it together, and that's the way we are as humans. We're not perfect. We're a messy amalgam of different character traits and of history and of lineage, and then of the choices that we ourselves make. And it's fascinating to follow a single character like Patton through the course of history, and see how he influenced history and then how history influenced him. Really thought provoking for me. And I'm just going to move right into my application.
Yeah.
My application was, set goals and then do the work required to achieve those goals. Patton, I cannot stress it enough. That's what made him who he was. He wanted to be a preeminent war hero, essentially.
Hmm.
And so to do that, he mastered logistics, he mastered tactics, he mastered a cult of personality, if you will. He mastered working with staff members. He did everything he could, in public, anyways, to stay out of politics, to stay out of Army politics. Even when he was faced with reverses and junior officers being elevated over him, he didn't let that affect him, at least in a public way. Now, obviously, in private, we have access to his diaries and different things, and it ate at him like it would most people. But he generally conducted himself in a worthy manner when those situations arose. So I want to, as I'm moving into various stages of life, whether it's with real estate or with my family or in our church, want to make sure that I'm setting those goals and then taking the action necessary to follow through on them. That's my application for this book. So a little bit broader, but something that is in almost every page, and is probably the main reason that I would recommend this book.
Awesome. Yeah, it totally makes sense. For me, the application is probably a lot different than what you got. It's so one thing I noticed as reading through this book was he was very straightforward with people. He'd find ways to say it, but he wouldn't sugarcoat things. He wouldn't really uh, say what people wanted to hear if they needed to hear something else. So my application is, don't, if there's a situation, don't dance around it. Kind of as I was reading through, I know this is on Patton, so I don't know the whole story on Eisenhower and why he made certain decisions. But sometimes it did notice. It seemed like Eisenhower would be dancing around the situation. Patton would just come in, be like, all right, boom, 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 let's do it. And he would just be very straightforward. And so I want to start being more straightforward with people and not be so diplomatic, political. I mean, I'm not usually like sugarcoating things and sucking up to people, but I don't want to, especially as a new job coming in, I don't want to be afraid to say the obvious thing that needs to be said, because that will save time, effort, money, resources. It'll save so much work in some situations. So I want to just be able, like, hey, if I know this and I know, I have the knowledge, I have the work experience, and I know what needs to be done, I'm just going to say it and just push to do it. Yeah, that was what Patton did. He had his foundation, he had the experience, and he just said it and pushed for it.
Yep, a quote. I feel like we could have just done a quote episode here, but the Patton had that kind of ties right in with what you're saying is if everyone is thinking alike, then somebody isn't thinking.
Exactly. Yes.
So
exactly.
So what I hear you saying, Brad, is when you find yourself in that situation where there's maybe a consensus that was too easily arrived, you're gonna, if you feel differently, you're not gonna be afraid to get in and stir up the pot a little bit.
Exactly. Yes.
I like it. Like it.
So.
Awesome. Well, again, the book that we covered by Martin Blumenson, Patton, the man behind the legend, available on Amazon. It is not available on Kindle, which I discovered as I went to read this book. So I got a good old hard copy. It was fun to have an old book in my hand again. Brad's giving me, I think it's a hearty round of applause. So thank you.
It's a golf clap. If you can hear it near the microphone.
In honor of Tiger Woods, yes.
Yes. Yeah, there you go.
Our next book is going to be The Fitness Mindset by Brian Keene. It's a fairly recent book. And Brad is super excited because this is going to be what catapults him to complete the Murphy Challenge. Did you say by July 1?
No. Right? Murphy Challenge is on my 10-year goal, man.
Oh, that's right. The 10-year, not the 10-day, the 10-year plan. But Brad 40. And I are looking forward to getting in and reading at least this book. We probably are going to add in a couple of other fitness-related books in the coming 6 months or so.
Yeah.
It's a genre that I know I haven't read a lot of. So I'm excited to be challenged in some ways, to rethink how I view fitness a little bit, and to hopefully pick up some tips that I can take with me as well, particularly from a mindset point of view. So Brad and I are looking forward to getting into that. We also are going to be covering another chapter out of Business Adventures. So look for that episode coming in the near future. As always, hope you enjoyed today's episode. If you did, please leave us a like or a rating or a review wherever you downloaded this podcast. That helps us out tremendously as we're continuing to grow our audience. Shout out to the folks in Ecuador that are giving us a listen. Thank you for your support on the equator, as it were. So with that, appreciate you joining us for another episode of Review Improve. This is your host, Sam Rust, signing off.
And before I go, guys, please look us up on YouTube. You can see Sam's beautiful face and watch him actually deliver his messages. So, look us up on YouTube. It's up there, the whole thing, the unedited versions, because we do edit it, the audio version. So look us up. All right, catch you guys later.